what they've understood is that if they get attacked by the Japanese, they're not to kind of get overly stressed about this. They should just stay put and not move. No one move after dark. Anyone who's seen moving after dark gets shot at, because the only people who could be moving could be Japanese. You hold your ground, you don't give an inch, and eventually you will wear down the Japanese because they won't be able to resupply. So they'll run out of ammunition, they'll run out of food, they'll start to starve, they won't be as effective as fighting forces, and this is how you win.
This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor. It is February 1944 in the jungles of Burma. It's 6 a.m. local time. There is a lot of shouting and screaming and gunfire to the immediate north. A man named Messervy, commanding the 7th Division, is in his pajamas and awakens immediately. There has been talk for days now of Japanese forces to the north of the position of the 7th Division. However, nothing has come of it until this outbreak of fire. What does it mean? The general must make decisions immediately. He dresses and heads to the radio to inform his command. This is a scene that opens a struggle for not only Burma, but all of the Far East between the Japanese Imperial Army and the British India Army of 1944. I welcome the author of Burma 44, The Battle That Turned the War in the East, James Holland. James has written very carefully of these events, and they start picture within picture within picture. So we're starting with the detail of a man in his pajamas, a fighting general who's fought his way across the British Empire map from Africa. Now he's in India, given the command of an infantry division that's part of a general advance designed by Lord Mountbatten, commanding all the forces, General Slim, commanding all the forces. Each of these, think of them as dolls within dolls. And General Messervy at the point of the spear, in these jungles that you cannot see through. They're surrounded by hills and jungles. Somebody can be 10 feet away from you and you don't see him. I welcome James now to explain to us this moment in time in 1944 and the risks for both combatants, the Japanese Empire and the British Empire, and the larger war being fought in Europe. James, congratulations and a very good evening to you. Thank you for this. Who is Messervy at that moment? What do we need to know about the decisions he'll make over the next 2 weeks?
Yeah, thank you, John. Well, Messervy's a really interesting character. So he's an Indian Army type. There was the British Army, which was obviously the British Army back home in the UK, and then there was the Indian Army. And the Indian Army is officered before the war by white British officers, and most of the troops are Indian or Gurkha, or also British as well, but it is a distinct beast. And Messervy is someone who's brought up in the Indian Army. By the beginning of the Second World War, he's in the Middle East. Then he gets sent to East Africa. He's involved in the East African War, and then gets promoted up to command the 4th Indian Division, and then later the 7th Armored Division, which is the Desert Rats. And actually, he's incredibly good. He's a progressive. He's a thinker. He's twinkly-eyed. He's charismatic. You know, he's one of the better generals around. But 7th Armored Division suffers this catastrophe in June 1942, went to Brook Falls. It's an absolute nadir of British forces in the Western Theatre. And he's one of the heads that rolls. He gets sacked and sent back to India, where he becomes a director of armored fighting. And he's very, very appalled at the state of the Indian Armored Corps at the time, and urges his superiors to bring in much bigger tanks. They had a few American Stuarts, but he's saying, we need Shermans or at least a Lee Grant tank, a 30-ton tank. And everyone's going, you can't possibly do this in India. There isn't the technology for it. There isn't the infrastructure. Weak bridges, lack of infrastructure, etc., etc. And he goes, no, we must. Proves the point by getting a Sherman to the front line in northeast India, and gets his division, and gets his regiment of Grants who are there in India, in Burma at that time. But he has by this point moved on, and he's commanding the 7th Indian Division, has massively transformed their training, and he's one of a new cadre of generals and commanders that have come into the Southeast Asia Command Theatre, which is India, Northeast India, Bengal, Assam, and of course Burma itself, in this period, in the kind of big clear out of the not so good ones and the ones who've been captured by the Japanese in the early part of the war. And he's one of this kind of new cadre of much better informed, more experienced, dynamic commanders. But he's in a tight spot on that morning of the 6th of February, 1944. That's for sure.
Yes, and the communication goes out to his commander, Christensen, and his commander, Slim, and his commander, Mountbatten. Let's meet the commanding officers, because they play a part here in making decisions before and after.
Yeah, absolutely. So 7th Indian Division is part of the 15 Corps, along with the 5th Indian Division and the 81st West African Division. And they're in a kind of a line on this kind of western side of northwest Burma, in an area called the Arakan, which we better know now as sort of, the Rohingya area. It's been in the news for all the wrong reasons. And Christensen is the corps commander. Again, he's very competent. He's kind of part of the new breed that's come into Southeast Asia Command. And above him is Slim, who has he's been a very lucky general. He was wounded at Gallipoli, then wounded in Mesopotamia in the First World War, made a couple of mistakes in the war in East Africa, but it was kind of a long way away from the central hub, manages to get away with that, comes back, oversees the retreat of the Burma Corps from Burma in May 1942, when they're all being routed by the Japanese, but comes out of his reputation enhanced, not diminished. And he's still there. And he ends up, when the Eastern Army commander is sacked in May 1942, he ends up being acting Eastern Army commander, and then is eventually appointed Eastern Army commander, and immediately insists that Eastern Army has not been successful. It's associated with defeat, needs a new name. It becomes 14th Army. And he is the first commander of 14th Army. He's a great thinker. He's hugely experienced. He's absolutely, completely dynamic. He's arguably the greatest general that Britain has during the Second World War, and one of the top generals we've ever had. Sees the complete picture, and he has been thinking very hard over the summer monsoon season of 1943 how he can turn fortunes around for the British Indian Army in Northeast, in Southeast Asia, and has come up with these various plans, new training, different approaches to infrastructure, building new roads, working out different ration scales, doing mend, because they're kind of very much at the bottom of the heap in terms of supply prioritization, much more improved training, a recognition that this is asymmetric warfare rather than conventional warfare in the jungle, that the jungle is your friend or your enemy, and basically instilling a sense of confidence, self-belief, and purpose into the men of these different creeds. I mean, they've got 30 different ration scales, for example, that they have to manage. And basically trying to work out how you can turn things around. And this is the first moment where this new kind of, after the big changes in the fall of 1943, this is the first time that his newly kind of turned around forces are being tested, and boy, are they being tested. And then above him is Mountbatten, and Mountbatten is raised huge amount of eyebrows when he was appointed the first Supreme Allied Commander of Southeast Asia Command, this new command that comes in, and he immediately says, I want, he talks to Slim, goes, I like the cut of your jib, I want you as my army commander. And Slim sort of says, well, don't you think you need to kind of check with a few other people first? And he goes, no, I'm the Supreme Allied Commander. I can do what I like, and I like you, and you're my man. And actually, it was a very, very, very smart move and absolutely the right decision. But Mountbatten is kind of 42 years old. He's got film star looks. He doesn't look like your classic British kind of silver top, mustachioed, swagger stick holding, old hat, old school British Army general. He's part of a new breed. He's great mates with Noel Coward and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. He's a relative of the King. He knows everybody, but he's also been in charge of combined operations back in the UK. So he understands the kind of air, land, and sea picture, and he's been part of the Imperial General Staff Committee. So he's seen higher level command decisions. And his appointment is really one that reflects the desire in the summer of 1943 to use amphibious warfare more openly to reclaim Burma. So lots of amphibious operations. And the problem with that is they suddenly realize they don't have, by the time they get to the end of the war, the Tehran conference in December and end of November 1943, the combined chiefs of staff, both the Americans and the British, realize they don't have enough landing craft for all the things they want to do. So the one that gets bumped off the list is Burma and the Arakan. So suddenly he's there to oversee all these amphibious operations, but they don't have the landing craft and the shipping to enable them to do it. So they're having to do it the hard way, which is through jungle, over hills, and all the rest of it.
Yes, one of the joys of reading James's books is you realize that eventually all of this is happening simultaneously as they're searching for landing craft in the Far East. Italy is searching for a landing craft for what is called Operation Anvil, which is the south of France invasion.
Right.
As London is searching for landing craft for Overlord. There's a joke that Ernest King is always taking the money to build carriers, and he would have won the war faster if he just built landing craft, but there was no glamour. So we're going to go to the Japanese side because you're going to see this battle, Messervy in its pajamas, is the linchpin of who's going to win all of the Far East. Is it going to be Japan and India, or is it going to be Britain to hold off Japan? The book is Burma, 44, the battle that turned World War II in the East. James Holland is the author. The Japanese side. The Japanese Imperial Army is on a winning streak and disdains the British Army. They've broken them every time they've come up against them, most notably at Singapore. But all the battles, the Japanese assume British will run when they're hit hard by the Japanese infantry, combined with their air, the Zeros and the Oscars. The air is part of this battle. We're going to, though, attend to what we know about the Japanese intentions. This is the 15th Army, and it comes to a plan called Yugo, which is to invade Assam, a part of Burma, India, the Bengal side. This is all Bangladesh and Myanmar now, but in those days it was Burma and India. They're going to invade Yugo, the Japanese Imperial Army. And the plans are displayed to Tojo, the prime minister and militant hawk, who will be hanged by the Allies after the war as a war criminal. At this point, however, Tojo is the absolute supreme commander of decisions being made as both prime minister and the head of the army. And he approves of the Yugo plan. It comes to the Japanese 28th Army, a man named Sakurai, and then it comes to the 55th Infantry Group, and then it comes to a local commander. Important, all these numbers, is that these are fighting generals and fighting troops. James, explain how it is that the British saw the Japanese at this point as robots, as strongmen. How did they picture them in their minds?
Well, you have to remember that Britain has suffered this, incredibly humiliating defeat at the hands of the Japanese, first in Malaya, then in Singapore, and then in Burma. And the final retreat from Burma is they get across the Shenham Saddle in the kind of northeast of Burma, into India, across the Irrawaddy in the end of May 1942, and the kind of the Burma Corps is saved for another day. But from a Japanese point of view, they've got everything they need. The whole point about going to Burma and to Malaya is so that you get resources. And one of the problems, it's the same principle that, which sends Nazi Germany into the Soviet Union. They haven't got enough themselves, so they need to go and get them, which is, they're losing in the late 1930s, or they're not winning, put it that way, in China, and China is running out of steam, and that's where they're hoping to get all their resources from. So they're now having to go further afield, which is what's prompted the kind of attack on Pearl Harbor. It's what attacked the Dutch East Indies, and attack on British possessions in Hong Kong and Malaya and Singapore and Burma and all the rest of it. This is what this is all about. It's about having a sphere of influence where you can go and get all the resources you need, which then enables you to kind of be this new kind of power in the whole of the Pacific Southeast Asian region. That's what they're trying to do, and they got into Burma and all the rest of it. So, but they have nothing but contempt for virtually anyone who is not themselves. And the bottom line is, though, is that they've sort of stood still. They've had these great successes, and they now think that their enemy is going to stand still as well and not learn from these successes. Learn from the defeats that they've suffered. And the British Army, or the Indian Army, I should say, that they're about to come up against at the beginning of 1944 is very different to the one that they've been fighting in the Arakan just a year earlier. So the British then attacked again in the winter of 1942 into 1943 and got absolutely nowhere. So they, from a Japanese point of view, they just think it's same old, same old. They don't think the British have changed, or the leopard can change its spots, but they have. So there's a kind of, there's arrogance there, there's hubris there, most definitely, in their plans. And also, they're not all singing from the same hymn sheet, because the commander of the 15th Army is a chap called General Renya Mutaguchi. And Mutaguchi thinks that, he can get into the plain of Imphal in what is now Manipur state in northeast India, from Burma, and then drive on up to Kohima, and then to Dimapur, which is the main railhead by the Brahmaputra River, which is then the kind of way into Assam, which is where all the American airfields are and Allied airfields, which are doing the crossings over the hump, as the Himalayas is known. And this is the flying in supplies to Chiang Kai-shek's nationalists at Chongqing in China. So you're talking about connections. This is how it's all connected. And so Mutaguchi thinks, well, if I get in there, then I can get up to Dimapur, then I can spark revolt against the British in Bengal. The whole of the British Raj will collapse like a deck of cards, and that then gives us a chance to kind of, improve our situation in China, and maybe we can then turn the entire war and everyone will be forever in my debt. Now, it's fair to say that not everyone is kind of singing from the same hymn sheet as that, or not quite as ambitious as him. But they do see the point. They do see the threat of British incursions into Burma again, and they want to go back into India enough to be able to stop that and have a strong enough counterattack in the Arakan in northwest Burma to, again, make sure that Britain doesn't come through, the Indian Army doesn't come down through from what is now Bangladesh, what was then part of Bengal, in northwest Burma. And again in northeast Burma. So that's their overall plan, and they see this as a two-fisted punch. So Yugo is the attack on Imphal to Kohima and up to Dimapur. That's the main effort with the Japanese 15th Army under Mutaguchi. But a secondary effort is the first punch, which is on the left flank, and this is in the Arakan, and this is to kind of wrong foot the British and to get them to draw troops away from the main effort, Yugo, from around Imphal. So what they're hoping to do is do an encirclement around the 7th Indian Division, which is positioned on the right-hand eastern side of this north-south running spine of hills called the Mayu Range. Then cross over the Mayu Range and get in behind the 5th Indian Division, which is on a parallel with the 7th Indian Division, but on the coast. So between the Mayu Range and the coast of
30
Arakan.
seconds, James, 30 seconds. The plan is called Yugo generally, the assault of India. But Hago is the one.
Hago is,
and
is
when
the
we come
specific
back,
one.
we're back to the tent with Messervy, now at the center of all of these expectations. In fact, Mutaguchi, the man with this vision, fired the shot at the Marco Polo Bridge in 1937 that started the war with Japan. So he believes he's a man of destiny. James Holland is the author. Burma 44 is the book. James and I have talked about the battles across Europe, and it's a great pleasure to learn about the Far East. I was aware, reading history of European war all my life, that something important had happened between Australia and India, but I had never had the details filled in. This is a piece of it. It's a way of approaching it because it's apparently a small battle between an attacking force led by a very hard fighting Japanese general who has a plan to capture the 7th Division and drive on the 5th Division. That's enough. These are rolling hills, very heavy, thick jungle that you can't see in. And capturing the 7th Division means encircling it. We begin with the commander of the 7th Division in his pajamas asking on the radio what's going on. He's in what is known as an administrative zone. Admin box is the way the battle is described today, admin box. He's not surrounded by combat units. He's surrounded by the support staff, the communications team, the drivers, the tank park, the truck park, the ammunition hill, all of the things that a division needs to continue to function. That is the admin box. And the Japanese are pressing the attack immediately to overrun it. The Japanese take no prisoners. And this is an important detail that explains to me the motive of these men to fight beyond reason and resist. James, there is a massacre early in the battle against the what we would call the hospital zone, but it's called the main dressing station. Why do the Japanese massacre everybody? What is their thinking? Why conduct themselves in this fashion?
Well, they've got a sort of culture of brutality, but the main thing is just to kill everybody. So, and then you haven't got to carry them. I mean, the whole point about the Japanese way of kind of fighting through the jungle is to fight incredibly lightly, and then for you can move fast and you can move stealthily because you're not carrying so much. But that then is dependent on you capturing your enemy's supplies. So one of the reasons why they're focusing on the admin box. Actually, I should just say that the Messervy is like a couple of miles to the north of the admin box. So what you have is you don't have a front line as such. What you have is you have your infantry brigades with their different companies. An infantry brigade is like an American regiment. You have 3 battalions in each regiment, 3 battalions in each brigade. In the case of the Indian Army, you would have 1 Gurkha battalion, 1 Indian Army battalion of Indians like Rajputs, Punjabis, whatever, and then you have 1 British battalion. So that is the same format in every single brigade. And you have these in their little outposts, and they're all kind of dotted all over the place. And then behind them, you have the administrative area. And the administrative area is your kind of supply base. So this would typically be a clearing in the jungle where you have all your stacks of rations and ammunition and guns and motor transport and mule trains and all the rest of it. And then behind that, you have the divisional staff. So that's where Messervy is. But what the Japanese want is they want to come in, and this is what you can do in the jungle, this asymmetric warfare, is you can sneak in around the back because no one can see you. And you can do this at night or whatever. And then you come and attack the admin box. And you want to get that first because that's where you're going to get your supplies of food and rations and ammunition and guns. So they actually come in with a whole bunch of gunners, but no guns, because they're confident that they're going to be able to capture the British guns, the Indian Army guns. So what they want to do when they go to the MDS is the main dressing station. This is just on one side of the admin box, which is this kind of clearing, and they're kind of nestled away in a kind of sort of sheltered corner on the edge of the jungle. They think they're kind of secure there and safe from kind of air attack or anything like that. But the Japanese, because they're right on the edge of the jungle, they're able to just come out of the jungle and attack them. And it's not like they've singled out the dressing station. It's just the first area that they've decided to attack, and they're just killing everyone. Because if you've got to round them up, then you've got prisoners that they're going to slow you down. So if you kill them, then that's one problem you don't have to worry about, and then you just steal all their kit and supplies. So that's the idea. So what they're doing is that they've surrounded this area. They've come in. So you've got Japanese coming. You've got one part of the brigade in the kind of north protecting the kind of northeast area of the box. Then you've got 2 brigades south of the box on the kind of ostensible front line, although it's not a precise front line. Then you've got the kind of the divisional headquarters. And Japanese troops are sort of coming in everywhere. So they're kind of they're all but the administrative box, the admin box, is completely surrounded. Completely surrounded. They've cut off the Nagakidok Pass, or the Okidok Pass, as the British call it, which is this track that's been hewn out of the hills that goes over the Mara Range and links them to the 5th Indian Division. So they're effectively surrounded now in this area. And the MDS attack is just the first of many assaults that they're going to make to try and reduce this administrative box and take it for themselves.
And Messervy disappears into the jungle and he reemerges at the admin box.
That's right.
The next day. I wanted to emphasize, though, that my reading is that there was no point in surrendering because you'd be murdered. And everybody understood that. The Japanese disdained anybody who surrendered, and they thought murdering them was just natural.
Yes, because they had contempt, nothing but contempt. But also, it is this practical point, or however ruthless it is, that if you have prisoners, you've then got to kind of look after them. The whole point about the strike forces is that they're supposed to be operating with speed, and the only way they're going to do that is by feeding off the spoils of victory, effectively. That's what enables them to move quickly through the jungle, is this by carrying very small amounts of supplies. But the problem they've got is that the British by this point get this. They understand the plan. And so what they've understood is that if they get attacked by the Japanese, they're not to kind of get overly stressed about this. They should just stay put and not move. No one move after dark. Anyone who's seen moving after dark gets shot at, because the only people who could be moving could be Japanese. You hold your ground. You don't give an inch. And eventually you will wear down the Japanese because they won't be able to resupply. So they'll run out of ammunition, they'll run out of food, they'll start to starve, they won't be as effective as fighting forces, and this is how you win. And then you turn it back to them. So when you're attacked, you hold, counterattack.
And now we introduced air because that's the detail that will matter most. This
Yes.
is this is an air battle that takes place between technologies. The
Yep.
Hurricane was the old technology, the Spitfire is the new technology. The Dakota is the new technology. What is the
Yes.
Spitfire? What is the Dakota to this battlefield?
Well, they're incredibly important because the point about the Hurricane is it's not that it's a bad plane, it's not that it's not maneuverable or a good gun platform or anything like that. It's just it's very slow to climb. And to win in the air, you need speed of climb because that enables you to attack from height. And when you attack from height, you're diving down quickly, makes it harder for you to be shot down by the enemy, but also means you can maneuver around the sky so you've got the sun behind you so that you're hidden from sight from the enemy that you're trying to attack. So it makes you much more effective. And the Hurricane has stood still. It's kind of reached its peak in 1940 during the Battle of Britain. It's got nowhere to go as a design, whereas the Spitfire is constantly being upgraded and upmarked. So what they're sending out there is Mark 8s. But because these Spitfires are so precious and because it's such a palaver to get them all the way from Britain to Southeast Asia, they are super training the three squadrons that have been equipped with them. I mean, it's only literally three squadrons: the 136th Woodpecker Squadron, and the 615th and 602nd, if I remember rightly. But these three squadrons, so they then get extra training in how to use these, so they're minimalizing the amount of losses. And in the ensuing months, by the beginning of January 44, they've basically won control of the airspace over this battle. And this is really important because once you're standing still, you then want to be resupplied. And the only way to resupply is by sending over Dakotas who are dropping in parachutes of supplies or just dropping them neat, straight onto the ground, which means coming in very low level, which means you can't have Japanese aircraft loitering in the sky above, which is why it's so important that you clear the skies. And that's why it's so important that you have Spitfires there who can do that for you. And
And
that has been achieved. So that is a total game changer. And they brought in more radar and local observers and this kind of stuff. So they're not only are they controlling the airspace in terms of aircraft, they're also controlling about how they're controlling the airspace in terms of how they're controlling it from the ground as well.
there's a sense of humor here about rum.
Yes.
Whose idea is the rum, James?
Well, it's very interesting because morale and improving morale is really important. So Bill Slim says to Alf Snelling, who is his chief his quartermaster general, he says, "Look, I've got a good idea. If we're going to go and resupply the admin box, why don't we put a rum into kind of every a couple of bottles of rum into every fourth plane?" And Snelling says, "I've already done that, sir."
Yes. So the Dakotas are delivering rum along with all the other critical supplies.
Yes, and it's important to say that the commander of the Troop Carrier Command is Brigadier General Bill Auld, who is American. There is a it is a joint U.S. Anglo-U.S. Eastern Air Command, which includes the crossings over the hump into the Himalayas into Chongqing and the Chang's China nationalists, but also supporting Southeast Asia and Burma and India and all the rest of it. So Slim and Brigadier Auld and Brigadier General Davidson, who's commander of the US-led strategic forces, air forces as well, they're all very tight. They get on very well. They mess together. They have headquarters together. They are absolutely one. So the idea that the Americans don't have any part in this is absolutely not the case at all. They have a very, very key and important role in this whole battle.
And the overall commanders know that the 7th Division is surrounded, admin box is surrounded, and they're underway immediately to push through to relieve the siege. Yep. However, that's going to take several days. And James takes us into the trenches. They dig very deep trenches and they hold their positions night after night, day after day. The horror comes through because they cannot see into the dark. Everybody looks like a ghostly figure. And every once in a while they'll be screaming, but they're disciplined not to leave their trenches or they'll be shot by their own side. So yep. I think the moment that is scariest, James, is when they listen to the prisoners being tortured and they can't help them. They don't know who they are. And there was the other moment where the Japanese mocked them in English.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I mean, can you imagine it? You're sitting there, you're knowing you're surrounded by troops who are kind of, the eyes from the middle of the jungle are all upon you. You have no idea when they're going to attack. I mean, talk about taut nerves. I mean, it must have been unbelievable. But as the battle continues and they don't succumb in day one, and then they hold out a second day, and then a third day, and a fourth and a fifth. So you can see confidence starting to rise in the defenders in the admin box that actually, yes, they can do this. And the interesting thing is one of the main lines of attack is this nullah, which is a kind of sort of dried riverbed that winds its way in from the kind of southwest of the admin box, this kind of roughly rectangular area, this clearing in the middle of the jungle. And time again, the Japanese keep coming up this nullah, which gets christened blood nullah, and every single time they do, they get absolutely slaughtered from troops on the slopes above. You can see it, hear them coming, see them coming, open fire, and it's an absolute slaughter. And this is what I think is so interesting: is there's a kind of lack of flexibility in the Japanese. They've had these great victories at the start of the war, but they're not changing, they're not moving on. They're kind of basically keeping the same tactics, or certainly in Burma anyway.
Yes, you say that some people refer to them as robotic
Yeah,
because
automatons.
they
Yeah.
capture the plans of Hugo and they see exactly the assembly points of the Japanese and know
Hmm.
where to vector their artillery. There is artillery support. There are tanks, very critical. What is a Lee tank,
A
James?
Lee tank is a Grant tank. It's the same thing. It's just a slightly different, mildly different model. But this is the kind of forerunner to the Sherman tank. So it's a Sherman tank chassis, and it's before they could manufacture substantial numbers of rotating turrets. They had this kind of smaller. They didn't have a turret. They had a 75 millimeter main gun, but it was sort of slightly to one side, and it could traverse and go up and down a little bit, but it couldn't rotate. And they're rejects and obsolescence from the European theatre, but
Right.
they're incredibly effective here in the very close quarter uh, um, confines of jungle warfare.
The book is Burma 44. James Holland is the author of The Battle That Turned World War II in the East. It is an irony that as I'm studying James's very careful explication in detail of the men in those trenches at the admin box holding out for weeks against a Japanese force that means to capture them and or kill them. The Japanese especially wanted to capture Messervy, the former commander of the Desert Rats, a famous general from the Desert Rat point of view. That's another day. However, at the same time, this is a part of the world where there has been a crisis for some time, nothing to do with the war. It's called the famine of Bengal, the Bengal province of India. It took place in 43. And there's a political point, I believe, James, I picked up on. The Japanese believed that they could take the Indian army and the Gurkhas and convert them to an army of liberation. Is that how they described it?
Yeah, and there's a guy called Subhas Chandra Bose who's been a big political figure, and he comes in on the side of the Japanese and creates he's commander of the Indian National Army. It's a small force, but they are involved in the Battle of the Abin Box actually. So there is kind of Indians on Indians. This is all part of this is a more kind of radical militant version of the Quit India campaign, which is Nehru and Mahatma Gandhi and all the rest of it. They've been imprisoned in the summer of 1942 for agitating. The British attitude is, yes, we all know that the kind of the Raj is over and the game is up, but we're not going to help us to defeat the Japanese first, and then we'll hand you back your liberty, your independence. So. And there is also this kind of feeling that if you think we're bad, then just wait till the Imperial Japanese turn up. And on this matter, the British are unequivocally correct. But the Bengal famine is an absolute catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe in the middle of the war, which sees well over 3 million Bengalis killed as a result of it. And it's prompted by a series of a cyclone which prompts three tidal waves, which wrecks a huge amount of agricultural land, and is exacerbated by a fungus that hits rice reserves, and is also exacerbated by the fact that the British have confiscated coastal craft from the Bengalis on the eastern Bengali coast. And the other reason is because the British have devolved power to the states in 1935, and they are democratically elected, run by democratically elected Indians for the most part, and they in 1942 have agreed to close borders. So there isn't free open borders between these states, and getting food to Bengal is a problem. Now that is overruled, but those tariffs and trade barriers are overruled by Wavell, who is the commander, who is the viceroy of India in the summer of 1943, and food supplies do start coming to Bengal, but it's too late. The catastrophe has happened, and not only are people starving. When you're starving, your own immune systems break down, and so the many lurgies that are around in this part of the world, typhoid, typhus, hepatitis, malaria, dysentery, all those sort of things, they start to affect as well. And there is no welfare state at this point. There are charity kitchens and so on, and people are doing what they can to kind of avert the crisis, but it doesn't stop 3.5 million people dying of starvation or disease. And it is an absolutely terrible moment in Indian history. And this is all happening at the same time as the British are trying to kind of reverse their forces and stem the flow of the Japanese. The Bengal famine is kind of, is kind of working its way out by the end of 1943, so it's kind of a thing of the past by beginning of 1944. But there is agitation in India, to put it mildly.
Yes, the agitation, but the men in the admin box include those who've seen the famine up close because they arrived in the region
Calcutta,
dying in the streets. One more detail, where the Japanese almost completely wiped out at the admin box, 90% battalion casualties.
Yep. Something like that, yeah. And the thing is the Japanese tend not to allow themselves to be taken prisoner. And they're not all dying from battle casualties. A lot of them are dying from starvation and from disease and all the rest of it. This is the failure of the Japanese way, which is terrific if you have a great victory and you can feed off of the spoils of war and feed off your enemy's riches. But if you can't do that, you've got a big problem. And they're not ones for kind of admitting defeat very readily. And so it turns into this, it's just absolutely horrible. I mean, the smell all around of kind of dead Japanese, left unburied, dying in the jungle, all the rest of it. I mean, you can imagine the circling vultures, et cetera, et cetera. It's a horror story, to be perfectly honest.
And the Japanese do not react well at all, and they do not withdraw. And there are battles that follow the admin box, but the big siege is over by the middle of the month. However, the larger war that James has described for our understanding continues until the breakup of India and the contest today. Myanmar is now Burma. Bangladesh is now the Bengal, part of the Bengal state. And the Chinese and the Indians are at loggerheads in the Himalayas. So what seems 80 years ago is right with us. The book is Burma 44. James Holland is the author. I'm John Batchelor.